Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Hello, my friends. So today I'd like to talk to you about a very, very important topic when it comes to Buddhism. As a matter of fact, it's so important that it was the impetus for the Buddha to go on his spiritual journey. Right? The Buddha calls these the divine messengers. Right? The divine messengers are messengers of the gods, right? Messengers from the deities. These are things that are all around us all the time. But mostly, we choose not to see them. We choose not to investigate them. We choose not to understand them. And that leads not to our benefit for a long period of time, as the Buddha says. So I'll start this by talking about the story. The Buddha is talking to the monks, and he talks about King Yama, Lord of the Underworld. And in this sutta is called the Divine Messengers. Right? And King Yama, the Buddha is saying that a person comes in front of King Yama and they did not do good deeds of body, speech, and mind in their life. They did not honor the noble ones, honor their parents, etc., etc., etc. Right? So they're going to King Yama. And when they come in front of King Yama says, "Did you see the divine messengers, good sir?" And the person says, "What? Divine messengers? What's that?" And so then King Yama says, "Did you see an old person? A decaying person?" And the person says, "Oh yeah, I guess I did." Right? "No, I didn't pay attention to that. Yeah, there's old people, but I didn't pay attention." Right? And so King Yama says, "Well, because you did not heed this divine messenger, right? Your actions are yours alone, and only you can have the consequences of your actions. Not mother, father, siblings, spouse, children, nobody else." Right? And so King Yama says, "Did you see the second divine messenger?" And the person says, "I don't know." Second divine messenger, he says, "Did you not see a sick person? A person who's ill, diseased?" And then the person says, "Well, I guess I did, but I didn't pay attention to it." And so then this Buddha says the same thing. That King Yama says, "Well, only you are subject to your actions." "Did you not see the third divine messenger?" "I don't know. What was it?" "Did you not see a dead person? Somebody dead 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 or more?" And the person says, "Well, I guess I did, but I didn't." Right? This is the thing. Of course, we've seen these three things. We have seen with our eyes an old person, a sick person, a dead person. Right? This is not what we mean here. We've seen these things, but we've not contemplated them. We have not taken them on and investigated them and understood them. Right? For if we did, then we wouldn't be in front of King Yama. Right? And so then, because the person says, no, I didn't see these, and then King Yama says, well, you're subject to your actions. And then it goes through a whole list of, hellish activities that the poor person has to suffer. But the point of this is that these divine messengers, right, they're showing us something that we need to understand, that we need to investigate. Old age, sickness, and death. Where else does that sound familiar? Huh? Maybe the story of the Buddha, the traditional mythos of the Buddha's story of his going forth. Right? We know this traditional story that the Buddha was a prince and he was kept away from all of these things. He was kept away from the divine messengers. There were no old people. There were no sick people. There were no dead people, according to the king, so that Prince Gautama would not experience these things. But then Prince Gautama wanted to go out and to see the kingdom. And then when he went out, the first time, he saw an old person. And that so shocked him, he ran home. He went back. Like a child gets afraid and runs back to their mom, right? And he was depressed. He says, what is this old? You mean we all get old? What is this? This is new to me. Nobody told me about this. And then so he gets his courage up and he goes out again and he sees a sick person. And the same thing happens. He runs back to the palace. And then he goes out again and he sees a dead person. And he runs back to the palace. And in the traditional story, what does he see? He sees a fourth sight. The fourth sight is the sight of a shaven-headed ascetic. Right? And then this is, after seeing this old age, sickness, and death, after understanding that we are subject to these things. Nobody is exempt from them. Right? And then add on to that the fact that we are born again and again and again and have to continue experiencing these things and going through this again and again. This gave the Buddha much encouragement and much zeal to say, okay, I need to find a way out of this. Right? So these three things, these divine messengers, are so important to Buddhism that they are literally what spurred the Buddha on his path to find awakening. Right? Without these divine messengers, there would be no Buddhism. There would be no teachings for us right now. Right? So these divine messengers are important. They're powerful. Right? What do we do in society? Right? When somebody dies, they go to a funeral home, and the person, they put him in a nice suit and they, try to make the dead body up look very nice. Right? I've been to many funerals. I remember one time hearing somebody say, oh, they look nicer now than they did 2 weeks ago. So somebody who's a corpse, a dressed up corpse, looked nicer. Right? This is what we do. We want to avoid thinking about death, talking about death, hearing about death, and seeing death. We don't want to have anything to do with that. Same thing with old age. When we reach old age, we want to dye our hair, right? Or if we're losing our hair, we want to wear a wig or get extensions or whatever, right? We want to get the Botox to straighten out our skin so we're not all wrinkly looking, right? We want to do all kinds of things to try to make this body youthful again. And the same thing with sickness. We don't want to see sickness. We don't want to hear about it. Even when somebody gets cancer, they have the experience of even friends of theirs avoiding them, right? Because the people don't know how to handle having a friend with something like cancer. right? Because this is what we do. We avoid these things. And the Buddha knew this. The Buddha even saw this in himself. Right? In the suttas, in the early texts, there's a sutta called Delicate. And I think this is, in the early text, there's not much of the Buddha's story in there. There's little fragments here and there. But in this text, you actually see where the Buddha talks about how he was delicately nurtured, meaning he was very, he grew up rich and he had different mansions and he had all the pleasures and everything that he could need and want. And then he says, but he started to contemplate. And he started to contemplate, it would not be right for me, who is subject to old age, to be disgusted or dislike old age, right? Or somebody who is old. Right? In different cultures, some cultures they treat old people with much respect, and in other cultures not so much. Right? So the Buddha's reflecting, he's like, I'm going to get old. I'm going to be old. It's not right for me to have any disgust with old people, with the concept of getting old, the body decaying, etc. And he says, likewise, I'm also subject to getting sick. So it would not be right for me to be disgusted with sickness, with illness, with people who are ill. And he reflected, I'm also subject to death. So it would not be right for me to be disgusted with people who are dead, with dead bodies and people who are dying. The Buddha says we have 3 intoxications. We're drunk. We're intoxicated with youth. We're intoxicated with health. And we're intoxicated with life. We're intoxicated with youth, just like how I said, when somebody gets old, they want to dye their hair and make their, get rid of their wrinkles so that their body looks and feels young again, right? Because we have an intoxication with youth. We want that our body should always be strong and youthful and beautiful, good looking. But we really know, or we should know, that this is not always going to be the case. Right? The divine messenger getting old. There's a wonderful either Jataka or commentarial story of a king. And the king said to his barber one day when he was young, maybe in his 20s or in his 30s, he said, when I get a gray hair, tell me, show it to me. Right? And so many years later, this king got the gray hair. Right? And the barber saw it, and the barber took the gray hair, and he was afraid to tell the king, oh no, the king is not going to be happy that he has his first gray hair. Right? And so he says, King, here's your gray hair. And the king says, okay, it is time. And so he called together his heir and all his ministers. And he says, okay, I have got my first gray hair. It is time for me to abandon the rulership, to retire, to go into the wilderness and practice. Right? So that's what he did. He gave the kingdom to his heir and all his ministers, and he went and he became an ascetic, and he went into the woods. He went into the wilderness to practice. Right? That's wise, isn't it? Right? That's a wonderful. He saw that divine messenger, that first gray hair. Right? And instead of, oh no, I don't know, I'm getting old. People are gonna not like me. They're gonna think I'm old, right? Because I have gray hair now. Rather than that, he says, good. This means that I don't have that much time left. I should use it skillfully. I should practice well, right? So I remember I guess maybe that's why I'm a monk, but I'm a bit of a weird bird in terms of, I remember when I first got my first gray hair. I'm 42 now. I think I was 36 when I got a gray hair. And I said, wow, this is amazing. My first gray hair. And I was all excited, and people looked at me like, what? Who? That's silly, right? But that's the importance. That's understanding. That's, oh, okay, I'm not getting any younger. Right? I'm subject to old age. When you're young, you don't think you're going to get older. You don't act like it either. But then the older you get, the body starts to, the eyesight starts to go, and all kinds of, signs, divine messengers that age is coming start to appear. And I can avoid them, or I can accept them and investigate them. Right? The Buddha wants us to do this. He says, it is not right for me to have aversion to this, to avoid it. Right? It is part of this body, part of this experience. Right? Instead of having an intoxic, so the Buddha says that when he contemplated on these three things, old age, sickness, and death, he said his intoxication with youth, his intoxication with health, and his intoxication with birth, being, having more and more birth, continuing with more and more life. He says those were abandoned. Right? So the Buddha wants us to face these divine messengers bravely. The Buddha wants us to understand them, to see them. When they show themselves, right? Don't run away from them. And that's hard, because that's what most people do. But if we are Buddhist practitioners, right? If we follow the Buddha's teachings, this is what we must do. We must do what is hard. Right? Because the Buddha says that there is no fooling yourselves. The Buddha never says that this practice is easy. He continuously says that it's hard. It goes against the stream. But for us to have these benefits of the Dhamma, to practice well, this is what we must do. And so this is why the Buddha gives a reflection. This is called 5 subjects for contemplation. And the Buddha tells us, the Buddha starts out with, whether you're a woman or a man, lay or ordained. So basically nobody is exempt. There's nobody exempt from this. Everybody should practice, should reflect on these things daily. At least once a day. Sometimes more if you can do it. But at least once a day. And so they're going to sound familiar, right? There's this one thread that goes through all of this. What's the first reflection? I am subject to old age and decay. I'm not exempt from old age and decay. See, we're reflecting on this, just like the Buddha did. The second one, I'm subject to illness and disease. I am not exempt from illness and disease. The third, can you guess it? The third is, I'm subject to death. I'm not exempt from death. The fourth is often the one that people have the hardest time with. Right? Because they think, well, I can handle my old age, sickness, and death, but I have a hard time with others. Right, so the fourth is, the Buddha tells us, wants us to remind ourselves every day that I will be separated from everything, everyone that I love, that I hold dear. Right? It is the nature, because not only do I get sick, get old, and die, but others get sick, get old, and die. All beings, everywhere. Like, this is also part of the reflection. that you are subject to this, and so are all living beings. Not even just living. Even things like stars and planets and galaxies, they all die too. Right? It is the nature of this existence. The Buddha tells us that things arise, they persist for a time, and then they cease. So you're born, you persist for a time, although you're getting older, you're growing, getting bigger, and then as you get into elderly, you start to shrink a little bit, but you're persisting for a time, but then there's an end. Okay? So the Buddha, says that when Sariputta passed away, and Ananda was very sad, right? And the Buddha says, have I not taught you these 30 some odd years, 20 years or whatever it was, that which arises must cease. That which is born must grow sick, grow old, and die. This is pure Dhamma. Straight Dhamma. Okay? And it's not that hard to see. If only we have eyes to see it. If only we courageously and bravely face these things that we don't want to face. That's what the Noble Eightfold Path is. Going against the stream. Right? So, the 5. I'm subject to old age. I'm not exempt from old age. I'm subject to illness, not exempt from illness. Subject to death, not exempt from death. I'll be separated from everyone and everything that I hold dear. The 5th one is the crux of everything, meaning that all of these reflections are for this 5th one. The 5th one is the Buddha says, I am the owner of my kamma, heir to my kamma. My kamma is my relative, my neighbor. Whatever I do for good or ill or evil, to that I shall be the heir. And this is what this comes down to, right? Going back to the sutta in the beginning with King Yama. Right? This person, because they didn't do these reflections, because they didn't do these investigations, they acted unskillfully. And how you act, you are the heir of that. So the reason why the Buddha gives us these reflections and encourages us to practice these over and over and over and over again continuously is because he wants us to act skillfully. Right? When we know, oh boy, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get old, I'm going to die. When we know this, we act skillfully. We act in a good way. Not even, and that's not only just for Buddhists. Anybody. How many people, how many experiences, stories you hear, people who are kind of like realizing that they are going to die, or they have a near-death experience and that changes their life. And they act better. Right? This is just nature. Right? As human beings, this is what we do. We reflect on that I am going to get sick, I am going to get old, I am going to die. What is the best thing I can do with the time that I have? And the Buddha, or more likely a king, answers this. In the sutta, simile of the mountains, Pabbatoppama Sutta, the Buddha is speaking with one of the kings. And the Buddha says to the king, suppose, good sir, that your scouts came in from all 4 directions, north, south, east, west. And they said, O king, there are huge mountains coming in from all 4 sides, all 4 directions, crushing everything in its wake. Meaning that these mountains are all going to come and crush everything, right? Where the king is, the kingdom, the castle, everything. So the Buddha says, what would you do, O king? And the king says, what is there to do but to practice Dhamma? And the Buddha says, I exhort you, O king. I tell you, old age, sickness, and death are coming in like mountains as high as the sky, crushing everything in its wake. What is there to do? The king says, there's nothing to do but practice Dhamma. Right? So when you reflect on these things, you will act skillfully. There will be less to be angry about, more to be grateful for. Right? If you have grudges and things with people, why am I angry at this person for 20 years? Why do I not talk to this person for so long? Why should I do this? That's not good. Right? So you act skillful. You act in ways that are beneficial for yourself and others. And when the time comes that you are sick, the time comes that you get old, you won't fall apart. I was lucky enough to grow up around many elderly people, not just family, but also community. Right? And I watched people grow old. And I saw how people handled it. Some people, when they got old and their body started to fall apart, they fell apart mentally. They got depressed and sad and miserable. And some people, even though they got old, they were still joyful. They still lived life to the best of their ability. They still tried to be good and to do good. Right? So I got to see that in my own experience. Okay. Right, so for me, I don't want to be the person that falls apart when I get older, right? I want to be the person who understands this is nature, this is life. I am subject to old age. I am subject to sickness. I'm subject to death. Knowing this, how do I act? How should I act in the world? That's the important question. Okay? Because death is certain. Life is uncertain. We don't know how long we'll live. We don't know if we'll have major illnesses or not. We don't know if our body will be okay when we're older, relatively speaking, or we'll have so much problems that we can barely get off the couch, get out of bed. We don't know these things. We only know how we can choose, how we can act, the karma that we can perform. That's all we know. And so the Buddha has us understand these reflections so that we can act skillfully, so that we can build up lots of merit, lots of good deeds, so that we can investigate our experience, develop wisdom and insight, and eventually, gradually, slowly, free ourselves from our suffering, free ourselves from this round of samsara. Right? This is what the Buddha did. And he was spurred on because he understood, he investigated old age, sickness, and death. The divine messengers. They're all around us, everywhere. We just don't choose to see them. Right? But then a friend dies, a family member dies, a friend or family member gets sick, and then it's thrown at us, right? And we've spent our whole lives avoiding that. And then what happens? We freak out. We don't like it. We become fearful. And we can't even be there for our friends and our family, right? While they're going through what they're going through. Because we have not done the practice. We have not investigated. We have not understood. And so it came as a big surprise to us. You just went along in life thinking, oh yeah, well my friends and my family, we're all going to be around for a long, long time. And yeah, maybe we have to die. Or maybe we have to get sick, get cancer or whatever, but that's not going to be for a long, long time. And then the divine messengers come knock and say, hey, here we are. Right? What are you going to do about it? Just like those mountains coming in the simile of the mountains. Right? So this is why it's very important for us. And this is something that all of us can do. This is not an advanced meditative technique that we can think, well, this is not for me, I'm not ready for this. This is something that we all need to do as Buddhist practitioners. This is something that is a basic part of our practice. That we understand. Not only am I subject to old age, sickness, and death, but so is everyone around me, all beings, everywhere. So why don't I treat people with metta instead of anger? Right? Why don't I have compassion? Right? Why don't I be happy for people when they have happiness? Right? These kind of things. Right? The normal petty silliness that we exhibit as human beings, when we reflect on these things, we abandon them because we realize these are not helpful. They're not beneficial to myself or others. So why should I even bother doing it? We're not around here that long. While we're here, why not do good? Why not act skillfully? Why not be kind? Have metta? Develop happiness, sukha, right? Why not do that? That's the power of these reflections. That's what these reflections are for. To spur us, to give us energy, to give us zeal, to do good, to act skillfully, to make our lives better. Right? And this is not meaning by trying to control and force our lives to be how we like it because we want to be a certain way. No. To make our lives better because we understand reality, we accept it, and in doing so, we lessen our suffering. You really do sincerely know, because you've practiced a long time, you're going to get old. You do sincerely know that you can get sick at any time. Even a little child can get sick and die, let alone an old person. You really do sincerely know that we're all ending up in the grave or in the cremation pyre. We're all ending up there. Okay? So when you reflect on these things, and at first it might be morbid, you might feel, be afraid, scared, right? That's normal. That's okay. It's because you've never reflected on these things before. At least not on an extended basis. But once you get past that initial fear and anxiety of it, actually what comes? Much peace, contentment, gratitude. All very positive, good, wholesome, skillful things. So with this, friends, I encourage you to always see the divine messengers. Don't let them pass by. You don't want to go see King Yama. You want to act skillfully. Practice Dhamma, like the king says. When old age, sickness, and death are coming towards us, there's nothing we can do but to practice Dhamma. Thank you, friends.